Hello, and welcome to episode 31 of the Power Score LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is Jon Denning in Los Angeles.
Jon, how's life in Los Angeles?
Life here is pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. This week is a little chaotic, but life is good.
This week has been very chaotic. As some people know, last week for me was immensely chaotic. They just shut the power off where I live for 3 days due to the wildfire threat, which I support because the fires are terrible and we don't want that. But the worst of it was the temperatures were about 70 degrees and the wind never really kicked up above 5-6 miles per hour. And that's not really classic fire weather.
Well, Dave, let me tell you what life with power looks like.
Don't rub it in, man. I have power back now, obviously.
Air conditioning is glorious. 1,000 emails a day, less glorious.
No, it's funny because I sent around a message to the office that said about how much I love power, and I quoted an old Cinderella song, which talks about you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And that's definitely how I felt when the power came back on. We were cheering.
Yeah. Well, you got to basically play like at-home camp out with the daughter, which is kind of fun.
It's fun for one day.
Yeah. I hope you guys built a fort.
We did endless number of things that made me think I was back in 1837 or so.
In that fort, I hope you had cocktails. Speaking of,
no.
Here's my transition.
Yeah, I like it.
What are you drinking?
Well, in honor of today's topic, which is a discussion of the September 2019 LSAT Logic Games section, I have chosen a drink you mentioned a while back that I wish I had actually made, and that is a Dark and Stormy.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, layered drink of ginger beer, dark rum. Pretty solid drink overall.
What rum?
What are you drinking?
What rum?
What rum? Myers in this case.
Interesting. All right.
That's what I had on hand, so I just went with it.
I used to run around with a descendant, a namesake of the Gosling's Rum Company, a kid named Malcolm Gosling.
I think most people would prefer you were hanging out with Ryan Gosling.
I was not.
No offense to Malcolm.
No. I'm sure none taken on his end, although I doubt that's the first time he's heard it.
I'm sure it isn't.
But, yeah, Gosling's Rum, I think, is the traditional Dark and Stormy.
Is that what it is? You're right. So. They actually have like a trademark on it.
I think they do. Yeah.
I remember this from the last time looking it up. So
he used to bring me like strange bottles out of the vault. He would come by my house and be like, "This is a 22-year-old something," and we would drink it like animals.
You showed it no respect.
No respect. Yeah, right out of the bottle.
With that in mind, what are you drinking?
I have got a good old Scotch. I watched a documentary over the weekend on Amazon Prime about Scotch. I think it's actually called Scotch, which is not the most inventive title. It's a Bowmore, pronounced Bowmore, but spelled Bowmore. 15-year-old, a glorious Scotch, finished in a sherry cask. It's great. Oh. If you're a Scotch drinker, I highly recommend it.
I'm not, so I couldn't even speak to this topic.
Yeah, no, I was not talking to you.
You and I are both well aware of the fact.
Yeah, I knew better than to try to advertise to you.
Nah, I'm not that guy. Scotch, bourbon, I can't drink these things straight. You guys, you do it. Anyway, the song that we've chosen for today's episode is one we actually considered for last week's episode when we talked about whether or not Logic Games might be going away. And it is an old classic from a Georgia band. And you and I met in Georgia, so this rings some bells from the past. It's from REM. It's one of the few songs that I like by REM. I would have to admit that I generally dislike their catalog. Songs like Stand just don't do it for me.
I find that a little disappointing. Athens, Georgia is where these kids hail from. Michael Stipe's got a restaurant there called The Grit. I think it's a vegetarian restaurant. It's pretty good.
They're no longer kids.
No.
No. Anyway, the song is The End of the World, which I think ties in really well with how people felt about this September 2019 game section when they were taking it and certainly after the test. So
yeah, a little bit of hyperbole in this choice, I think.
Yeah, totally.
As we will discuss, the song and the games don't align quite as nicely as people initially made them out to be.
I've already seen people online saying, all right, I just redid it and it made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
When we get to the third game, we'll talk a little bit about one of the mistakes that a lot of people made as they were reading not the rules, but really the scenario. So we'll get to that. Let's first talk a little bit about what's been going on in the LSAT world.
Sure.
If you have no objection.
No, none.
Well, there's been another famous blog post on their law:fully blog. And I like what they're doing with this. So as far as I'm concerned, I may, poke a little fun at them, but I like the fact that they're getting out there and they're at least posting this on the blog. I would love to see them post more on social media, especially to address some of the issues that we're seeing. But we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, and you gotta love the nature of the content here, which is obviously where we're going.
Well, they're telling people what's happening, and this is key. I would just push the message 10 times harder and 100 times farther. So this one is called Heading into the October LSAT, Updates Based on Lessons Learned, which is a somewhat chastening title. You think about that, like, we've had some hard lessons that they've learned. And what they really did was they updated something that they had told us directly and basically all test preparation companies last week, that they were going to make a few changes. So one of the changes is that it used to be you couldn't bring your tablet up more than 30 degrees. So it either had to be flat on the table or it could come up to 30 degrees at most, but you couldn't angle it up any further. And that led to a lot of discussion, especially by us, about the angle of the light and bad reflections.
Yeah, screen glare was a huge issue for a lot of people.
That's exactly right. And so at this particular time, they have decided to open that up a little bit more. And they say that you can now put your tablet at any angle except one, which is straight up and down. I'm like, maybe it doesn't do that very comfortably, but it's why bar that? Anyway, odd. But that's the quote, at any angle except straight up and down in order to angle your tablet for the most comfortable position. And I feel like this is in to some extent a direct response to comments that we made before.
For sure.
Because we have gone crazy about this as it was a stupid rule and it needed to be wiped away. And some of the things they've been doing recently, I think have been really good. They've been changing some of the mistakes that they made.
Yeah.
This was one of them.
It's unnerving, I think, at least for me, to admit how much they listen to us. But the truth of the matter is undeniable.
At this point.
I get this. I mean, and they've said as much to both of us. They definitely listen to what it is that you and I gripe about.
Well, I think, we're not randomly griping. We're distilling a lot of student comments into
we're a
something
conduit.
a little bit more focused.
To be sure.
So I'll take the pat on the back as far as that goes. Or
I love that you turned it into a compliment. I said unnerving, and you're like, thanks, guys.
Actually, it is slightly unnerving, but that's okay. It actually makes me feel good that we can talk about these topics and then changes are made. That's really cool. There was another change that was made that I think was, again, in direct response, and that was the really deep criticism that we gave about the scratch paper. And I didn't think this one would happen. But what they have said about the scratch paper is, and I'll quote again, we've upgraded the scratch paper provided to all test takers, and it's now stronger, whiter paper, and it has a less prominent security watermark.
Yeah. For those unaware, maybe if you're just kind of gearing up to take this thing for the first time, the scratch paper they've given for the past few digital tests has been that really flimsy, it feels like the 15th time recycled paper that's basically crumbling, and it had a huge LSAC security watermark right through the middle of it that you couldn't really write on and distinguish.
You couldn't see it.
Yeah.
You couldn't see your writing on top of it.
So they've actually changed the scratch paper for people in October going forward, which is, again, I think a huge bonus, an unexpectedly huge bonus.
Well, I figured they'd probably printed up 100,000 copies of that scratch paper, and there was no way they were going to eat the cost on that.
I saw that comment on Twitter where somebody's like, clearly the warehouse is out, now they can make make necessary adjustments.
Well, if they were smart about it, they probably ordered in low quantities to see how things would work out, and then we get this improvement, which I welcome, and I don't really care why or how they got to it.
Same.
I'm just glad that it is here. They also clarified their policy on the use of highlighters, saying that you cannot bring in separate highlighters to the digital test. Now, that's not the biggest deal because you already have a built-in set of highlighters in the tablet. They also reaffirmed, because there had been some problems in the past, that bringing in your own, again, number 2 pencils, not that it really has to be, but that's the standard, number 2 pencils is acceptable.
Right.
All right, so you can do that, which is great for Logic Games because if you make a mistake, you can erase it as opposed to using the pen that is built into the stylus.
Yeah, I believe that was all contained in the paragraph of like we're continuing to to train basically like our proctors, the people who are overseeing this.
Yeah, they've talked a little bit about how not everything is under their control. They sent out messages to the effect, to students at least, that say, well, the proctors don't work for LSAC. And I guess my view on that is, did you pay them?
Yeah, they most certainly work for you.
If you did, then whether or not they're full-time or part-time doesn't matter to me. Yeah, they worked for you.
Yeah.
So it's I'm sure it's like herding cats at times in dealing with that, but that's part of the job. Maybe you should pay more if that's part of the component here and get better service. But I'll leave that to them. Hopefully within the next year, we'll stop talking about this as a problem and we'll see some seamless test administrations.
But it's all good news, at least, I think we can report. A lot of times we open these things up with like the doom and gloom of the LSAT world, and in this case, not so much. I'm actually pretty pleased with how things are progressing. They seem to at least be cognizant of the fact of the improvements.
I think they definitely are. And, I generally consider myself to be an upbeat person, really positive. When I talk about the LSAT itself, the test, I'm always, really positive. I enjoy the test. I think you need to take a really good attitude into it and feel good about it. And then it's just been really depressing with how this year has gone in terms of what I've seen with test administration and student problems. And
that's fair. Yeah.
There are problems that we're not, really even addressing. There's students as of this time, which is now over 30 hours after scores.
Exactly the rest of this sentence.
Yeah, they don't have their scores yet. And so we know there was a technical problem. I understand these things happen. So I don't think there's any reason for us to kind of go on it. But the other thing that kind of bleeds right into is, surprisingly, on Monday, they released the scores and all the information. I say surprisingly because this one was not seamless. Gosh, it's already descending into chaos again.
There we go. Yeah, I feel like I opened that box and here we are.
You were premature in your celebration there.
God, you sound like every girlfriend.
You're running towards the end zone and at the 5-yard line, you're like, yay, and they knock the ball out of your hands.
Fumble at the 1.
It's a Leon Lett situation for football fans.
Jesus, have you just dated yourself? But all right.
No, I know sports history, man. It doesn't date me at all. I can quote stuff.
I was 42 when Leon Letts decided to drop that ball.
Let that go for the many people who don't know who Leon Lett is.
Anyway, let's talk about the score release.
Yeah, so that started coming out at 9 a.m., which we knew was going to be the case. They had said that they were going to release scores on Monday, and they held to that. I know some people want the scores earlier, but trust us when we say that was the most chaotic scene, waiting every day to see if scores would come. It is so much better, and people who haven't experienced the previous situation don't even realize how good they have it when it's like it's coming at 9 a.m., and they start coming out at 9 a.m.
Yeah, there's a huge chasm between wanting your score early and not knowing when your score was going to come. Understanding the implications
of every day refreshing your account, thinking, is it there? Is it there? Are there any signals? It was madness. And I remember there was one point in the buildup where I think one of my Twitter account had seen like over 1 million views. And I was like, this is insane. People are just refreshing it.
I believe it. Yeah. 1 million views from like 800 people.
Yeah, in the matter of like 6 or 8 hours, I was like, this is completely insane. And immediately taught me that I had no interest in, being a Kardashian or any type of, social influencer like that.
You and I both know that's a lie.
But no, that is not a lie. I have no interest in that. Plus, I'm not female, so I can't be a Kardashian.
Oh,
don't talk
Brody.
about Rob.
Poor Brody.
He doesn't exist to us. He's not really Kardashian. Get out of here. All right. But anyway, that test came out. Interestingly enough, the exams, the release disclosure books, weren't in the accounts at first. It took a number of hours for them to finally show up. There was some type of technical issue with this release at points that we haven't really seen previously. But they finally did post it in everyone's accounts, and so the test takers who were there have been able to actually see it.
Yeah, let me give a little context to this. So release tests like September, like June, November will be one as well. Your score is accompanied by a copy of the test, its scale, the curve, which we'll talk about in 1 second, and your answer sheet. So you can actually see, it's called like the item response report, IRR. And you can see what you answered for the various questions and, of course, what the right answers were. Those didn't populate with the scores this time for almost the duration of the entire day on Monday.
It was a long time.
Yeah, and a lot of people, of course, were understandably freaking out. Like, I want to see what I did. I see what I got, but I want to see what I did, and they couldn't. So that was unusual. Normally, they coincide.
We got the test relatively early because obviously we're licensees and they send us a copy of the exam. So it was kind of weird because I had the test, and as did you, for hours before the students who actually took the test were able to get it.
Yeah, I got a message from a student, by the way, on Monday who was actually concerned because I was talking about the games. And she was like, I know you didn't take the test. Be careful. Like, are you sure you're allowed to, like, how have you seen these things? You're giving away the fact that you have a pirated copy. And I was like, no, I don't.
No.
Like, we're allowed to see this. They actually sent us a copy directly.
We don't need pirated copies because we get it officially.
That's right. There was genuine concern, though, and which I deeply appreciated.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons I posted the scoring scale.
Right.
So that everyone could see what it was.
But you had access to that before pretty much anyone else did.
Yeah.
Because the system failed to update in the way that it normally does.
And normally it's not, we don't get that lead time. We used to in the past. They used to send us the test beforehand. They stopped doing that because, unfortunately, a couple other companies started releasing parts of it and talking about it, and that tipped off everybody that the scores were coming, and they didn't really like that situation, so they shut it down.
Back when score release was more mysterious, yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly. When you had no real idea when scores would come because they didn't hold to their deadlines. All that's dead now, which is a huge upgrade.
Yeah. It's a bonus, for sure.
So the scale on this turned out to be 13 missed for a 170, which is kind of like the ruler that we use to see how difficult the test was on the top line. And you've seen scales, usually, something like 11 is really normal. There hadn't been a minus 13 or better scale since, I think, June of 2014.
Yeah, it's been over 5 years.
Yeah, and there's only been, this was the 7th one that was 13 or 14 since 2005. So you think about all the tests in roughly the last 14, 15 years, and there's only been 7 that are 13 or 14 on the scaling. This tells you that the logical difficulty of the test was higher than average. And so one of the things they did was they offset that by loosening the scale up.
Yeah, and you can actually track this down a little deeper. Like 160, I think you missed 28.
It was loose.
Which is pretty loose. What is that, 73, right, for a 160?
That's exactly right.
Pretty good.
It's, I'll take it. Now, obviously, the counterweight to that is the test was harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't done the entire test because it's been madness since scores started coming out. It always is. We just get a ton of questions.
I'd love to give you some grief about that, some crap, but yeah, it's been 24 hours since we're recording this, and I haven't done the whole test either.
Yeah, I just, to get that kind of time would have required me to really not sleep, and that wasn't going to happen. So I have done the game section, though, and I believe you have as well.
I sure have. Yeah, that was the first thing I went to. I'm sure same for you.
Well, I mean, if people are talking about a section of the test in terms of infamy, then it's something I want to look at.
Yeah.
I'm the person who wants to go see the train wreck first.
Yeah, had there been a read and comp passage where everybody's like, that's just incomprehensible. Is this English? That would have been the first thing I turned to as well.
Exactly. So from a difficulty standpoint, when we talk about this exam in a first-hand way, it's really only based on games. I haven't seen the logical reasoning and the reading comprehension, so I can't really say overall, was it worth a 13 scale or is it really hard? The data says, according to LSAC, that it is a minus 13 test, and so it really doesn't matter what our opinion is.
Yeah.
But we can at least place the game section at this point in context. And I think for this exam, that's all people really cared about. That was the discussion point after the test. Once people were able to figure out their experimental section, it was games, games, games.
And I think this was ultimately like the cornerstone of that minus 13. If you had to pin it on something, like why was the scale looser? What was it that maybe drove people's performance down a bit? Here we are. It's got to be Logic Games.
And it's really interesting, too, because the first impressions coming out of this test were extremely negative. And when we talk about like score predictions, the first inclination I had was to go minus 13.
Yeah, I remember you texted or called me, and that was the first words out of your mouth. Is like, bro, this is a minus 13 test. Like, this is rough.
This is a good example of how your mind can change, especially as you hear different reports throughout the day. And as we went along, I was like, there's no way. I think you made the point that there hadn't been a scale that loose in 5 years. And I was like, that's a really good point.
Yeah. No, I used history to curb your expectations of it.
That's okay. I felt better about it later on, because then I was like, I talked to some students who score pretty well, and they're like, that section wasn't that tough. And of course, this is one of the kind of like separator points. For students who are really good at games, this section was doable. Mm-hmm. It wasn't easy, but it was doable. Whereas for a lot of students who struggle with games, this section, I'm sure, was a complete nightmare. And I understand that. But like when I'm looking at score predictions, I'm trying to sift through tons of information. My first response was 13, and probably 3 hours later, I was like, boy, I wonder if this could be an 11 test because the rest of it seems like it was really easy.
Yeah, I feel like I centered you between the two. 13 was initial, 11 was later, and I was like, 12.
Yeah, and of course, there's been times where I've been wrong and then moved to the right one, so this isn't any kind of compliment to me. But I finally, when I got on to 12, I was like, I feel good about this, and when I went for 12, people were like, that's crazy. It's an 11 or 10. The rest of the test was really easy. And I was like, then I had self-doubt.
Yeah. No, I saw a lot of claims of 10. And I was I don't think
I got a lot of flack for it. I think if I had stuck on 13, which was something that we never said publicly, so I'm not making any kind of special claim here.
No.
I would have, the whole 3 weeks, I would have been nervous. I would have been like, boy, I might.
Don't be 11. Don't be 11. Don't make me look like an idiot.
Really bad. So it's tough, There's no real easy way to predict it or know until you actually have the answer.
12 was a good call, but I'm actually happy we were wrong. Which I don't get to say a whole lot.
And if we're going to be wrong, we're wrong in the best way. We were one tighter than the actual scale. And I always say this. I'm like, look, I might say it's 11 or 12 or whatever it is, but I hope it's minus 16 or 17. It never is. But this is the exact way that you want it, even looser.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the rest of the world, but I talked to a number of our students who had done really well on this test and who are at times were like stunned. Mm-hmm. 5 points higher than they'd previously scored. That didn't happen for everybody. So if you're not sitting in that situation, just keep in mind, we talk about this all the time. Going in and taking the LSAT is like going to a casino and you spin a roulette wheel. Sometimes you get a test that's really good for you. Sometimes you get one that's just okay. And sometimes you get a test that's bad for you. That happens every single time. I think the discussion on this exam was magnified afterwards because everybody was like, games is crazy hard.
Yeah.
So let's move on and talk about those logic games.
I want to make one final point to that because I talked to you. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I did not mean to.
As I hit the brakes. I talked to a bunch of students yesterday who all were kind of lamenting a missed opportunity. And I want to maybe put a quick disclaimer on that. People were saying essentially like, I really should have taken this test. It was minus 13. November is undoubtedly, or October is undoubtedly going to be tighter. First of all, we don't know that. Second of all, look, this was a tough test. I mean, the numbers bear it out. The games, as we'll discuss, were not easy. There were no gimmies in this game session. So if you feel like maybe this was a window that was open and you didn't slip through it, don't feel that way. The next couple of tests will be standardized in the same way. If the scale's tighter, it means the content is more accessible for the majority. So I just want to say, like, don't beat yourself up if you feel like, man, I really should have taken September because of this scale. I don't see it that way.
And I don't either. If you go back to that June 2014 test that was a minus 13, that followed on the heels of a test.
It's the first pattern game in ages, too, by the way, I believe. Am I wrong about that? I think I'm right.
I think you're right. But that followed a test from December 2013 that was minus 14.
Yeah.
So those two, it was minus 14 and minus 13, and the three tests around them are all minus 12s. So it doesn't mean like, oh, I missed my one shot. And as you said, be careful about that shot. Because when you ask for a looser scale like this, what you're really saying is you're asking for harder questions on the whole. And that can be good for some people and it can be bad for others. So I think that's a good comment.
I will say
you made.
what I have seen of this test, and now we can transition into the games, as I know you're eager to get to. Man, this was right in my sweet spot. This was just a hanging curveball for me.
This was a test that you would have liked to have seen, clearly.
Oh, buddy, yeah.
So let's move on to the game section. And I want to put up a disclaimer beforehand.
Do it.
If you haven't seen the section yet or redone it and you're planning on redoing it, take a moment right now, pause.
Step away.
And step away, because we're going to talk about this with some specificity. I will say this, our intention is that by the time this podcast is posted online is for us to have the Logic Game section of this test posted
available
on our
to
digital
purchase.
platform.
Yeah, available for sale. You can actually go and buy and download it. That I'm hoping happens later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. In this particular instance, that's our goal, is to get the games up first, and then we hope to have the rest of the test up by the end of business on Thursday or so, if not sooner. So we're going to actually post it, and then that'll also be in the digital platform that is similar to what you experience on test day. So if you are sitting there thinking, man, I'd like to do it, hopefully we'll have the option to do it right upon listening to this. And if not, it'll be up relatively soon.
Yeah, and if you do intend to do it and it's your first time, then maybe hold off on the rest of this discussion until, well, post-test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can find that just by going to the regularpowerscore.com website, go into the LSAT pages, and you'll see it'll say digital tests and sections. And then you can actually access any test from June 1991 to the present, and any individual section from those tests.
It's a
and
really cool resource, and I'm sure we'll link directly to it in this podcast notes as well.
We will, and we'll soon be adding bundles in there too. So we're going to put in all the killer games, we're going to put in all the killer LR, all the grouping games, that kind of stuff. So all that's coming down the pipeline, and if you need to, go use it. Otherwise, we're heading on.
Let's do it.
So you want to do an overview of this section and then go through the games one by one?
Yeah, I think that's probably the place to start. Let's just talk about, from a very broad perspective, what we got here. And I'm going to start with a self-congratulatory note.
Oh, no, I'm so surprised.
Shocking to anyone who knows me.
Jon, so out of character.
I'm going to begin immodestly. This was exactly what we called, dude. When we did our little crystal ball preview of the next 3 tests through the rest of 2019, what we said about September and the next 2 was you're going to see sequencing and linearity, you're going to see grouping, and you're probably not going to see anything crazy. And honestly, Dave, I think the biggest mistake that some people made in this section is they didn't hear that clearly enough. The second game is where I'm referring, where the second game felt like an outlier, but if you had just treated it like a linear game, you'd actually been better off.
All right, so when we get to that, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's obviously a bit mysterious at the moment. It won't be for long. But this was a section wholly predictable and predicted by us.
What wasn't predicted, and it's because no one can predict it.
Don't put footnotes on this, man. Don't caveat.
Honesty's a footnote now?
Yeah, for me.
I totally disagree.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead. Make your disclaimers. Go ahead.
Well, let's clarify what you're saying. You're saying from a content standpoint, this fit precisely what we expected and what history tells us should be on a given game section.
Correct.
The difference here, and I think what really bothered people, was that from a difficulty standpoint, this is certainly a harder than average section.
Yes.
We were talking about this earlier, and the comment I made to you is there's no breather on this section. Each of the games has its own point of being challenging, and there are things that you could get caught up in that would really drive you to ruin, if not just distraction.
Yeah,
and
I think that's fair. The comment that I heard from a lot of people on test day and immediately after was like, where was the gimme?
Yeah.
Where were the free points? Because they didn't seem to exist here. And honestly, having gone through it a couple of times now, I agree with that. There wasn't anything that was just patently obvious.
Yeah, there's nothing that is like, I just erased that in 4 or 5 minutes, and now I'm ahead of the curve.
Yeah, gratitude was in short supply. I'll put it that way.
No, you get pushed through this section There's no doubt. And that's one of the reasons, as we've talked about, that the scale pumps up to minus 13. When people came out and said this is a hard logic game section, I agree with them.
Yeah, me too.
So taking that particular idea, that's something that if you didn't do well on this section, you should take comfort in that and realize that happens. Sometimes there's a bad RC section or a bad LR section. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's all very evenly balanced. And what you want to take away from that is it's not because you have some deficiency in you. It's because, hey, it just didn't match up perfectly. Each of us has certain skills, whether in life or in the LSAT. We're not great at everything. Jon accepted, of course.
Hang on. Yeah. Wait a minute.
Why did I know that you'd say something like, speak for yourself?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm still trying to pin down my weakness.
Uh-huh. It's
Shut
like
up.
that I always
You're
say
like,
this.
You're like, oh, well, I've got a list.
Oh, man. I'm going to just let it all go.
All right.
Roll off my back. So, anyway, for the rest of us mere mortals, Jon, you're not good at everything, and you're not going to be perfect at all the different skills on the LSAT. So sometimes the test is not going to match up with you perfectly. Sometimes it will, and that's when people all of a sudden see a score where they're like, I did better than anything that I'd done previously. This is unfortunately randomized and somewhat of a chance expedition when you go to take this. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it, the randomized nature of it. I will say, and I made this comment a little while ago, ignoring the possibility that I have a flaw, that this was a test that's right in my wheelhouse, that this is a test I would love to see. For people who are good at logic games, this is exactly what you want. Have the challenge exist in the place where you are most likely to overcome it. That's how I see this. So if you're a strong games person, you want a looser scale because it gives you some opportunities to screw up elsewhere. And you want a section that essentially highlights your own strengths. This does that.
I will agree with you on that.
That's what I meant by the idea of like, this is a test that I would have loved to have encountered.
You've been pretty vocal about that.
I continue to be.
I
Here
think
and
that
elsewhere.
might be a flaw on your part, but
maybe that's my flaw.
Like
I was due.
You can't see reality. Is that your flaw?
Yeah. This distortion field exists.
We should move on because I can go on with this all day.
Yeah, I feel you might. All right, let's talk about the games individually then. How do we start off here? You turn to this section, game one. What happens?
You hit the animal adoption pens.
Yes.
And I actually liked this game quite a bit. And the general features here are that there are 5 animals that are on display. Some of them are puppies, some of them are kittens. And you have 8 animals to choose from, 4 of which are puppies and 4 of which are kittens. So right away, you have kind of like an overloaded situation where you've got 8 animals going into 5 spaces, but they also have that second characteristic of whether or not they are a kitten or a puppy.
Yeah. By the way, favorite animal? Raisin.
Raisin's my least
Raisin
favorite.
the puppy. What? How do you not like Raisin?
Weak.
Easily the best of the 8. Oh, let me guess. You like Jaguar the kitten?
Of course, I like Jaguar the kitten.
Ridiculous.
First off, all the dog names are terrible.
Raisin, Scamp, Taffy, and Wags.
Taffy, and Wags. They're all little dogs. I prefer big dogs. I used to have 2 Great Danes.
You're heartless.
No,
You're
those
a
are regal,
monster.
powerful
How do you not
animals.
like Raisin?
These are probably poodles. No offense to everybody who owns a poodle. I'm not a poodle.
Shame on you.
You don't even like animals. I
I don't, but I like Raisin.
Oh, you and Raisin could have a great life together. Yeah, I would have to say Garnet, Honey, and Jaguar are my favorites here.
All kittens.
Yep. I like cats, but I like dogs more. So
I will notice you made a distinct, you've left Fluffy the kitten out. You picked 3 of the 4 and Fluffy gets left out. That's just cruel.
It's funny because I knew we were going to end up ragging on these
Did
names.
you? Yeah, me too.
When I saw Scamp, I think I was mildly demoralized. I was like,
Wags,
really, Scamp?
Wags is just lazy. That's just a lazy name for a puppy. Call it Dog. I mean, that's just lazy. Anyway.
Come here, Wags.
I do like that they at least separated these out like alphabetically. So you had the early alphabet kittens, the later alphabet puppies. That's
This is a feature that they do regularly that I'm a big fan of, is they don't try to confuse you by intermingling the alphabet here. They keep it separate.
Right. So you've got 4 and 4, a total of 8. You're picking 5 of the 8. Right away, there's this numerical mismatch.
Yeah, you've got 5 that are being chosen. You've got 3 that are out.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have to take a real careful look because you only have 4 puppies and 4 kittens. So from the initial analysis of this game, if you haven't even read the rules, what you know right now is if you have 4 kittens, you're going to have 1 puppy. So that's a 4-1. And you could have some 2-3 combinations. And then you could conceivably, again, without the rules in consideration, flip it around so it's 1 and 4. As we'll find out, though, some of these options get knocked out going forward.
Yeah, and let me just actually put a ad hoc disclaimer on all of these games because there was so much numerology, I suppose, involved in all the 4 games, really. There wasn't a single game here where it was just like, okay, obviously it's 1-to-1 distribution. All the games had some element where numbers played a role. If you're tracking numbers as a controlling feature, this section completely changes.
It gets easier.
Yeah, it lays down at your feet like raisin.
Yeah.
Come on.
First off, it doesn't lay down at your feet. And if Raisin's laying at my feet, I'm likely to step on him.
Raisin's a good boy, and you acknowledge it.
They're good dogs, Braun.
Yeah. Raisin is delight.
Oh, my God. I'm going to have my daughter send you a stuffed toy named Raisin. You'll love it.
Don't tease me.
Anyway, so the thing I will say about the 1 and 4, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 3, 2 is that we are talking about the composition of the 5 animals in terms of how many puppies we have and how many kittens we have. Because that's clearly, there's a number element. And I will say this about doing logic games. To me, a lot of times people focus on, all right, is it grouping? Is it linear? And numbers kind of float in the background. They don't really think about them unless there's something that just pounds it right at you that's like, you need to look at the numbers. The games in this test don't really give you that in-your-face number aspect. The numerical things that they're doing, you have to kind of figure it out. And I think that's one of the reasons this section was so tough is that a lot of students didn't hone in on the numbers. And at that point, the game feels like there's no control. All the games actually feel that way. Would you concur, Raisin?
Completely. No, I'm Raisin. I completely concur. Yeah, I mean, I say this a lot. Like, numbers are easy to overlook because the majority of games out there, numbers don't actually factor in. 7 people into 7 spots, you don't have to worry about numbers. And people, I think, get a little bit docile based on that. They get a little accustomed to the fact of, like, I can just, take this at face value. When you see any kind of grouping mismatch, like you do really in all 4 of these games, as we'll discuss, numbers are the central feature.
Agreed.
Numbers in terms of not only like the distribution idea, 8 into 5 in this case, or 4 into 3 as we'll see in probably the toughest game of the section. But also numbers in the sense of like, if you're really tracking this, the in and the out group, it changes the entire like tone and tenor of what you're doing. It completely refocuses your perspective and your emphasis.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at some of the rules. And we're not going to read the rules out. There's fair use where we can read some of this, but to read the entire game verbatim would be a copyright violation. So I'm not going to do that. But we're going to talk a little bit about the rules, and anybody who has the game obviously will be able to see what we're doing and some of the points that we're making. So the first rule basically says that the first and the fifth pens, the first and the last pens, are kittens. Mm-hmm. From a numerical standpoint, that means the 4 puppies, 1 kitten scenario, it's out. You can't have that anymore. So, because you automatically are going to have 2 kittens at the least, no matter what.
Right.
I don't know anything further than that, but the first thing that popped in my mind was, okay, that's great. That just took up 2 of the spaces and limited some of the possible outcomes that I'd been, thinking might be viable. Yeah. As I went into the rules themselves.
2 subpoints. Number 1, I love that you filtered that through the number idea, as you should. Mm-hmm. Number 2, focus on small groups. I mean, these puppies, these kittens, there's only 4 of them. Exactly. You're saying that 2 of the 4 have to be used. That's immediately limiting.
It's very limiting. And it could be that you may have more. I don't know right now. I
Right.
just know that I'm not going to have any less than 2 kittens, which means I can have a maximum of 3 puppies.
Yeah, if
So
I see 3, 4, or 5 things in a group, I'm instantly focused on that element, because removing one or limiting or even talking about that group is instantly, it's inherently powerful. It's very reductive.
notice also how we've kind of approached this. The discussion that we had about the numbers occurred right after the scenario. It's like, oh, look, what can actually happen? I think for a lot of people, they got to this game, they starting off the section, and they said, I know what this is. And then they just moved on from it without stopping to think, okay, wait a second, this 4 and 4 idea could actually be pretty powerful because these two groups, to some degree, are in competition with each other. Who can get the most, animals displayed from each group? And so it's easy to then go into a rule like the first one, look at it and be like, all right, I'm going to put a kitten here and a kitten there, and I'm good, and not realize that they've actually just chopped off some of the outcomes already. And that's what rules do. They limit the number of possible solutions in a game. And so you have to focus on this idea. There is this step that I talk about in the Logic Games Bible. It's in our courses between the scenario and the rules. And it's really important that as you've read the scenario, you absorb the different directions the game can go in. It's not that this game is tremendously difficult. It's certainly not easy, but it makes it harder if you don't think about the implications when you are reading and after you finish each of these sections. Let's go on to the second rule, which, features one of your favorites, Taffy.
Taffy. Taffy's a puppy.
I'm not going to say anything. I'll step on Taffy, too. Taffy cannot be displayed next to any kitten. So, T, who we already know is a puppy, can't be next to one of the kittens. Now, this is great, and I think a lot of people capitalize on this. They're like, well, we know Taffy's not first or last because we have kittens first or last, and now we know that Taffy, should Taffy be used, can't be next to a kitten. So
It
Taffy
can't be in 2 or 4, right?
Can't be 2 or 4. So if Taffy is going to show up in this game, Taffy is going to be in the 3rd position, and then we know that we have a triple block of puppies right there. You're going to have a puppy in 2, a puppy in 3, and a puppy in 4. You already have kittens in 1 and 5. So if Taffy is used, you already know the entire animal composition of that particular row.
Yep. Your only kittens are 1 and 5. The rest are puppies. Taffy's in the middle if Taffy's used. It also means that Taffy's really easy to knock out here.
Exactly.
One more kitten and Taffy's gone.
That's exactly right. And we see that come up a little bit later. And the interaction of these rules, I really liked it, to be honest with you. But ultimately, what you just said is really important. Taffy is so powerful, but that also makes Taffy easy to knock out because Taffy was this giant block. Yes,
poor little
Taffy's
Taffy.
vulnerable. You could step on Taffy really easily, which is funny for me to say that because usually you're the one that's talking about that, and I'm the one that loves dogs.
Stomp dogs? What are you talking about?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. You sound like a monster.
Anybody who knows me knows how much I love animals, and anybody who knows you knows how much you don't.
Yeah, I would starve Taffy at best. I'm not going to stomp on Taffy.
This is comical to me simply because it's completely opposite of how real life is for us. Anyway, so let's go to the 3rd rule.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, we've got 2 kittens, Garnet or Honey. You can only have exactly one of them.
This is an interesting rule because it's kind of a double rule if you think about it.
It reserves one of the 5 spaces automatically for G or H, and it also knocks out the remainder of G and H. So that is really, really powerful in a lot of respects. It's easy to stop and think, okay, I've got that. We know that it's a kitten. We also know that numerically, this is now going to limit you to a maximum of 3 kittens.
Yep.
And you now have arrived at your 2 distributions because you either have 2 kittens and you're going to have 3 puppies, or you're going to have 3 kittens, meaning you can only have 2 puppies at that point. So it's either 3-2 or 2-3. So that GH is really powerful. And when you look at that, if you have 3 kittens, one of them is going to be G and H. Then you have 2 open spaces for the kittens. You only have 2 others, F and J. So you'd have to use them. So whenever you have a 3 kitten scenario, you know the composition to a great extent at that point.
Yeah, FJG, FJH, that's it.
And if you think about it, if you only have 2 kittens, you're also limited because one of them's G or H, and you know the other one's knocked out. That means the other kitten has to be F or J, but not both. So it's little points of analysis like that allow you to think, okay, I'm in better control of this game than you might have thought initially.
Yeah, and what is it that's spurring on these insights? Numbers. People who are focused on that as a driving factor, they uncovered this. They discovered the relevance.
Well, you have 4 kittens. 2 of them can't go together, so you really only can get 3 kittens out of the group.
Yep.
And it turns out you always have 2 or 3
and
kittens.
You've got a minimum of 2, so away you see your distributions. Yeah.
Yep.
Hugely powerful.
It's very limiting all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And then here we come to the last rule, the ridiculous wags. If wags is selected, what happens? Garnet, one of the kitties, must be where in the second pen.
Yeah.
And rules 3 and 4 both feature Garnet. So make the connection right there. You know that if Wags is selected, then Garnet gets selected, but you can only have one of G and H.
Yeah.
And so that means if you select Wags, you're eventually not going to be able to get H. And you can infer at that point that W and H they won't be both selected.
Yeah, the contrapositive, so to speak. If H is there, not only is G gone from the third rule, but from the fourth rule, W has to be gone as well. And you really start to populate your outgroup.
It also answers question number 2 because they directly ask you about that inference right there.
That's, a perfect, incompatibility.
Yeah, and you got to expect that's going to be the case. They don't always ask about the straightforward inferences, but they do here, and it was a free point. So as far as that goes at this point, you have directly answered one of the questions. You don't know it necessarily, but that's going to come down. There's usually a list question. So there's 6 questions in this game. You're already a third of the way through without realizing it's going to be relatively straightforward. You're still going to have to do some work, but at least from that perspective, as you go down the path, you're not aware of it, but that's actually happening. It's like, okay, I'm learning things that allow me to answer these questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that 3-2 split, whether it's 3 kittens or 3 puppies, that to me was the key to this game. It answers question 4, like it answers question 3. So much of what you're seeing here was really determined, number-wise.
Mm-hmm. This final rule about Wags and Garnet also has a big impact on our friend T.
Mm-hmm.
Because as it turns out that if you select W, you're going to put a kitty in the second spot. What do we know about T?
Kitten.
Whatever. Kitty. Kitten.
I heard that in your Cartman voice. I don't know why.
Come on.
Yeah, kitty.
Show some integrity, John, every once in a while. But that last rule, if you select W, that's going to put a kitten in the second position. We already know from the rule about Taffy that Taffy can't be displayed next to any kitten. That would put Taffy in 3 and then puppies in 2 and 3 and 4. That means that T and W can't go together.
Right.
Which from a puppy standpoint does the same thing that the G and H rule did to the kittens. You end up with just 3 maximum possible out of there.
Yeah.
So
you're
for
either question 3, where you have 3 puppies, it's R, S, and either T or W, because again, they're incompatible.
That's exactly right.
These are really powerful inferences to make, and I hate to feel redundant. Here I am, all through the numbers.
It really, and that last rule about Wags is they hit questions 3 and 4 on that. Mm-hmm. They're really testing the same idea there. It's like, do you understand what happens where you're not going to have room for G to be second and what occurs? And both question 3 and 4 revolve around that kind of relationship with T and W and G. So if you look at that, you don't necessarily have to discover it beforehand. I think it is discoverable. Sometimes we talk about inferences and I'm like, oh, that's a tough one for someone to make in the heat of the moment. The W and H not being able to both be selected and the T and W both not being able to select it, I think are completely reasonable to discover during the setup. So
yeah,
that at that point, you should be feeling okay about the first 4 questions, and then you get some questions that are local at the end in 5 and 6, and you can pretty much either see the process that occurs from there, or you can try a few solutions. But if you focus on the number of puppies and kittens, it really reduces what can happen. I think the game plays out reasonably well. Harder than an average kind of like basic linear type of game that you would run into. And this is obviously an advanced linear game. So it's not an easy start to the section, but it's not a death zone. There's no indication at this point that the section is especially hard. It doesn't feel easy, but it doesn't feel really hard to me from this game. Do you agree?
Yeah, I'd say on average this is a tougher start than most people are used to.
This isn't what they wanted.
Right.
But it also isn't, it's not nuclear destruction.
No. I wouldn't be freaking out at this point. I'd just be like, that was a tough one to get things going with.
Well, to be honest, I'd be optimistic. I'd be like, right, that was a little bit harder than maybe the average game start is, so maybe I'll get some easier stuff.
Yeah, things are about to calm down. Nope. Game 2.
On to the second game, which we call the Museum Artifacts game. And this is a circular game.
Kind of.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
It is a circular game. It says the display cases are arranged in a circle, and that they're numbered 1 through 7, and 1 and 7 are next to each other. That is a circle, my friend.
I'm familiar with the geometry.
Anyway, as we look at this, I guess what I would say about this is the first thing is there's 7 of them. And I know this bothered some people.
Bothers me.
Why?
Because you can't just draw the easy, direct across from each other's spokes like you could with 6 or 8.
The starburst formation, so to speak.
If that's what you want to call it, sure. It's hard to draw 7 spokes off a wheel.
You just draw 6 and then you shoot one off.
I know, but those 6 are misleading.
Well, those 6 don't give you direct opposition, which in many circular games is important. So that's kind of like the first takeaway here. This isn't going to be quite like other circular games. One of the big features is they will talk about people on opposite sides of a table in a game that has, say, 6 or 8 members. That doesn't happen with 7 or any odd number.
Yeah.
And so you have to realize, all right, it's circular in the way that it's arranged, but the actual approach to this, they're not going to have a whole bunch of rules that deal with like the oppositional or pairing like that. And that gives you an advantage. The other thing is this, when they number the cases...
I was hoping you'd bring that up. Yeah.
Of course. I wouldn't let it go.
All right.
When they number the cases, you have to think to yourself, well, I could just write out these 7 spaces in a circle, make the starburst with an extra leg and number them, or maybe I could just roll it out 1 through 7 and just do it as a linear game and keep in mind that 1 and 7 are next to each other.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot with these, you can't see me doing air quotes, listener, but I am, outlier games. Mapping, for instance. Most mapping games, as people try to draw some sort of configuration, are really just grouping. Circular games, for the most part, are really just linear. This is sequencing. So I didn't even attempt a 6-spoke plus 1 wheel or whatever. I just drew 7 spots and remembered that 1 and 7 touch. That was how I did this game, and honestly, it was so much. I tried it the other way after the fact and despaired.
You and I did it the same way.
Yeah.
I turned it into a linear game, and again, as you said, circular games are linear games. So all I did was I just unrolled it.
Yeah, this one particularly so because they number the spots. Usually they talk about things just like clockwise, counterclockwise.
Exactly.
But they don't actually specify the positions, like the 12 o'clock spot or the 6 o'clock spot. In this case, them numbering the spots instantly turned this into just a flat linear for me.
And that's how I saw it as well.
Yeah.
Which it's not unprecedented. They've numbered spots before, but they don't usually do it.
Yeah.
And so I felt okay and justified in kind of like breaking that circularity. It wasn't even. It wasn't easy to draw. The 1 through 7 was nice and linear. The only thing you have to remember is 1 and 7 technically circle around a touch.
Yeah.
Not a
The
problem.
first thing I did when I actually drew this, I drew 8 spots and duplicated the 1 next to the 7. That was my first instinct, just to remind myself of like 1 and 1 at the ends, basically, or in this sort of looping Ouroboros pattern. That's the old like snake eating its tail. Yeah. But then I realized I didn't need to do that, so I just ignored the last spot. But
Right, because you drawn a circle and they were going to come back and touch anyway.
well, I didn't draw a circle. It's flat.
Well, whatever, the starburst.
Horizontal. No, I didn't do any of that. But having the 1 next to the 7 down at the end is like a reminder for myself. That was my first instinct, and then I realized I didn't need it. But as long as you can keep that in mind, firmly in mind.
Yeah, if somebody did that, I don't think it's a problem.
So what was your giveaway to not draw the spokes?
It was the odd numbering. I was like, and I'm accustomed to handling odd number circles like this. It's not going to freak me out. But the 1 through 7, those two things kind of combined to tell me, I think I can go ahead and it'll be easier to do this on a flat line than it will be to make the bicycle wheel,
right,
the starburst, whatever we want to call it.
Spokes. So odd numbers and the specificity of numbering positions. That was the giveaway for you.
That's what made me comfortable making that decision.
Same.
You could do that on any circular game, by the way. It's just that when you have things directly across the table from each other, it's really hard to realize which positions are opposite of each other.
Yeah, circles to me are really powerful to draw when you can see opposition.
Yeah, because they'll talk about 1 and 4 being opposite, and if you don't understand that, it's really tough to do in a line. But when they removed that aspect, and that's what happened when they used an odd number of places, that took away one of the big advantages of drawing this out in a circular way.
Yeah.
So,
that was the first clue for me, too. So I was like, there's nothing directly oppositional. But like you say, 1 and 4 in a 6-position table, that is opposite.
Well, then look at all the rules.
Yeah.
All the rules are basic linear rules. Next to, lower numbered, not next to.
Yeah.
It's in this particular position.
Even a split option for a single spot, the 7th spot has to have H or J. Like, immediately I was like, all right, if they're going to specify positions, I don't need to draw this in a circle.
Now, that doesn't mean the circularity doesn't play a role.
Sure.
I mean, in both questions 7 and 8, the fact that 1 and 7 touch does make a difference in terms of how you're like breaking things down. So it does come up. And I think they've placed those questions there specifically to be like, oh, don't forget about it. They want you to have that floating in the back of your mind when you do this game. So the thing is it okay to kind of like go with your gut feeling and change like what you would think the right approach is? Of course it is. A lot of people said, all right, I'm going to draw this out like a traditional circular game. They made the spokes. And then they were like, all right, I found that difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the students who actually went and drew it out as a line, at least in my experience, seemed to find it easier. I did.
I want to point back to an undercurrent theme that I'm going to continue to emphasize as we look at the remainder, which is numbers. The fact that there's an odd number here, to me, was extremely revealing in terms of how it dictated my own setup. The first game, 8 and 5, 4 and 4, like the numbers controlled that. We just talked about it. In this case, the odd numbered positioning controlled what I did in terms of how I actually like displayed this. Numbers, once again, huge factor.
All right, let's go into the rules.
Cool.
I don't know that we'll do the rules as deeply as we did on the first game here. I think we'll just talk about some of the more important ones.
Really, the last 2 rules to me are the most fun.
They are the key to this. The first couple of rules are really straightforward. You know, there's a dual option in the 7th position. You know, it's got to be the helmet or the javelin. And then you've got 2 rules that actually link together pretty well. And I will once again remind everybody, linkage is critical. The mask shows up in the 2nd and 3rd rules, and it creates what is a really standard arrangement, which is kind of like a sequence and then a block. Mm-hmm. So we know the necklace is it's lower numbered than the mask, but the mask is next to the helmet. And so what we have at that point is a situation where the necklace has to have a lower number, which is really important because all of a sudden, you know, who it touches or what have you isn't as important. It's going to have to be more to what we would have as the left side of our diagram.
Yeah. Yeah. And given the fact that H was just mentioned in the first rule, where H or J had to be 7, obviously all three of these rules potentially connect. If H is in 7, where's the mask have to go? It can't be 1, which is next to 7, the circle. Mask would have to go in 6, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and that MH kind of relationship that is built up in the third rule, or HM, whichever direction, it can go either. This is where the circularity sometimes bothers people, because one of them could be 7th, and then you could have the other one as 1st, conceivably. So when you look at that, if they said that the helmet was 7th, you could say, well, maybe the mask is 6th, maybe the mask is 1st. And so that's the one time where you start looking at the block where you think, okay, that could be an issue.
Yeah, the loop aspect of this. So of course, the mask can't be 1st because then the necklace couldn't go lower. So that rules that out. I will say this, Dave. I don't know if this occurred to you. Most things do, so I suspect it might have.
Yeah, I was just talking about the general without all the rest of the rules.
Right. That's more of a compliment than I tend to give you, but there it is. This
you give me compliments?
Yeah, most things occur to you. That's a compliment. This to me opened the door potentially for templates, where I looked at that 7th position as a split in the game. H obviously controls the mask and potentially the necklace, and I was like, I wonder. And then you get the next couple of rules which relate to J, and I was like, But I didn't do templates. I don't think they go far enough. Despite the fact that the 7th spot is split, the game obviously diverges really around that position. There wasn't enough to continue to explore.
Here's what I will say about that. Because, excuse me, I did actually draw out that 7th position where I put the 2 there and then just kind of took a look, especially because we know that with with H there, it's going to affect M.
M has to go 6, etc. Yeah.
Doing that was helpful because it forced me to see what was going on with N and that block. And I didn't take it further than that because I was like, there's no way to figure it out. It's far too open. Right. But just taking a moment to look at that was really helpful because I was like, oh yeah, that's that circular aspect coming into play.
Yeah.
All that aside,
yeah, you'd have like JPS 135, but unfixed. You'd have whoever's left, G and N 2 and 4. But again, unfixed. Like there's still a lot of movement.
You're also running slightly ahead of where we're at.
Yeah. We'll get to it.
We're getting to it right now.
Sorry.
Was that a rare or almost impossible mistake on your part?
The fact that I said sorry, I do regret it. I do regret saying that. I take it back. I'm not sorry.
Don't be sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
So the last 2 rules is a classic situation where you have to recognize what's going on. And this is probably a moment for some people where they didn't see it, and then this game got way harder because they weren't aware of like this structure, this lattice work that was kind of hanging over these spaces.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So you've got the second to last rule, which says that P and S are not next to each other. So it's a not block relationship. Immediately, you know, you can't squeeze them together. They have to have at least one space separating them. That's all well and good. And then you get to the last rule, and it takes both of them and adds them to the javelin, who we already had seen in the first rule. And so now we have 3 variables, P, S, and J, all of which dislike each other and will not be placed next to each other. And I've talked many times before about how I look at games and variables in a very personal way.
Yeah.
They hate each other. P, S, and J require at a minimum 5 spaces that they have to occupy because they need to get away from each other. If you have one of them in, say, the 3rd space, the other 2 at a minimum would be in the 1st and the 5th. It could be separated out a little bit more, but they have to take up a minimum of 5 spaces for their separation. That by itself is powerful. What's secondarily powerful on top of that is that you have a block floating around. The way the block interacts with that and the limitation that occurs is what makes this game not have just zillions of solutions.
Yeah, that HM need 2 consecutive open spots, and the PJS, as it were, are essentially pushed to the boundaries of this. Those 2 things overlapping each other are incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I feel like you can do this game in a way where the 7th question, which is a list question, is pretty easy, as are most list questions.
Yeah.
You do have to watch out in E for the little circular relationship between the scythe and the
SJ,
javelin. Yeah. And from there, I felt like the game was pretty reasonable. Question 9, the way to attack this is to make some solutions, to basically make a hypothetical and fill it in. And then the beauty is that from there, it answers questions 10 and 11.
Yeah, I loved that. As soon as I did 9 and then saw 10, I was like, I wonder. Sure enough, 9 solves 10. And then I saw 11 and I was like, surely not. But yeah, 9 solves 11.
And then you get to question 12.
What a gift.
And I would say, all right, it's another local question. Make a hypothetical out of this. Yeah. Attack it with some hypotheticals, and you can get through this game and feel like, all right, it didn't crush me. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that there's people listening who are like, yeah, but that didn't happen for me. And then I got scythed down by this game. They took a javelin.
Javelin to the heart.
Through the chest. So I'm in a warlike mood today.
I feel you.
Anti your dogs. What's my problem?
Well, these games will put you in that headspace. To me, this is the whole section, I think, honestly, is a really instructable section. This, to me, there's a lot of teachable moments as you run through these. Game 2 being a perfect example of how you can actually reconfigure games to your own advantage. Don't draw this as a circle. Draw it as linear. Sketch out some diagrams and see how they help you on other things. I sketched 8, 9, and 12. That's what I have actually done on my paper right now. And 9 answered 2 of the 6 for me.
You're exactly the same as I was in that breakdown.
Yeah, we're pretty much the same through this whole section. I like puppies more than you, but aside from that,
oh my God,
we're really
that makes me angry.
We're twinning.
I'm really mad about that, just because the truth is
I'm the one who's
owned dogs. I have a dog right now. Have you ever owned a dog?
I had one as a kid.
As a child, you had one.
Yeah.
As an adult formed person, have you had a pet?
No, but I've had some relationships
just
that were very similar. I've taken in my share of strays, David.
Yes, but I don't want to hear about, your
don't name a name. Don't say a name.
No, gosh, no.
You know most of them.
Some of them.
If you don't think I'm running a shelter, you're not paying attention.
I'm not speaking to any girlfriends of yours, because I've liked all of them. So,
yeah. What about game 3 though? That's my really
You've been waiting for this, haven't you?
It's my really awkward transition.
No. I know how excited you are about this game.
From my love life to flowers.
Those two things have never intersected.
Never once crossed paths.
There's no Venn diagram with John's love life and flowers. I don't think you're a flower-giving guy.
They just die.
Have you ever given a girl flowers before?
I'm more like a cactus.
Just answer the question, yes or no.
Yeah, of course I have.
Not your mother or any other grandparent or aunt or anything.
Yeah, I've given flowers.
Good.
I like flowers.
I'm happy.
Yeah,
I didn't think you had it in you.
You didn't think I had it in me?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. No, I like a gardenia.
Let's get to the flower game, because I think you and I were both fascinated to see this. We'd heard so much about it.
This was where all the fuss was, right?
Yeah. I think there were two things that were like, the flower game is impossible and the section as a whole is really hard. And I think we've established that the section as a whole is harder than average, and I understand where the difficulty comes from.
Yeah, and you don't have to take our word for it. Like, the curve backs us up.
The curve backs us up. But if somebody's like, I just got destroyed by this section, I understand why that happened. The question isn't whether that occurred. It's just like any defeat that someone is going to face. It's not about whether you lost. It's about what you learned from it.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of saying, all right, making mistakes can be really helpful. And this is a great example of it. This whole section, you go back and you're like, I missed that, I should have done this. All right, next time I need to focus on these elements.
Yeah, it's the Edison quote about 10,000 ways not to build a light bulb.
Yeah, I've got my daughter saying that now. She understands that, hey, I didn't make a mistake or I didn't fail. I just found a way that didn't work. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I eliminated one possibility. Good for me.
So, into the flowers game. This is an interesting game to me. A game that I think probably we will end up putting in our course at some point. We both really like this game.
I sure hope so. I love this game.
I know that you are going to record an explanation for this, probably either later tonight or tomorrow.
Probably right on the heels of this, honestly.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go through this, and because of that, I'll just let you liberally kind of
Well, I don't want to give away all the fun of my soon-to-be video. Can we just...
Different mediums.
Don't worry about Game 3, guys.
They're all great.
Watch the video one day.
So what do we have
this
here?
was a particularly... I love this.
It's really good. Yeah. So let's break it down, because you start off with 5 people. All right, so you have these 5 individuals, and they are making an arrangement of exactly 4 individual flowers. So we have that, and they're selecting from different varieties that are actually 4 of those. Notice the emphasis on the numbers here. And then it says that each person uses 3 kinds of those flowers. This is a really interesting point, because I know some people had problems with this game because they misread this, or they thought, okay, they didn't realize there were actually 4 flowers in what I'll call the arrangement, or the bouquet. They call it an arrangement. And they thought there were just 3 types of flowers in there. And that right there, if you miss that, you are dead.
Yeah. Yeah, that sum, that total, the 3 types had to add to 4 total. That, to me, was a huge key to this game. And I know, it breaks my heart to say it, but I know a lot of people miss that fact.
And I think that's really key. The one thing I always say is, if you have that error, and this is what got you on this game, or at least stopped you from going further with it, take heart, because that means the next time you won't make that same mistake, because you'll be a lot more careful reading the scenario.
Yeah.
Never speed through the scenario. Always make sure.
And always make sure as you read through it, the numbers are a central part of your focus. I don't know how to be more redundant than I'm being, but at the risk of numbers, once again, this game in particular, although the whole section is true, was just controlled by numbers. If you realize you've got 4 into 3, you had to have a double flower type and then 2 singles. If you just catch that at the outset, this game completely transforms.
Okay. So, back into the scenario. The thing that I'll point out is, when I looked at this, my first thought was, wow, there is a lot of open space to deal with on this, because you and I looked at it slightly differently, but yes, it was just different takes on the same relationship. When I looked at this game, I saw the 5 people, and then I saw that each one of them had 4 spaces. Mm-hmm. So I did it so that you could fill in each of the 4 spaces. Yeah. I know that you did 3 spaces.
Well, for yours, 2 of the spaces were going to be a duplicate.
We'll get
2
to that.
rows is 2 hyacinths, whatever. Yeah. For me, I did 3 spaces per person and just showed the duplication on a single line or single spot.
Because this is the numerical aspect of...
exactly the numbers, yeah.
You have 4 flowers going into the 3 types. And so 1 flower gets used twice, and then each of 2 others gets used once. So there's a 2-1-1 for each one of the people.
Yeah. I have to say, anyone listening to this before they watch the video that is forthcoming, I'm sure is wondering, which of those 2 did he choose to go with in his video? Did he adopt Dave's?
No, of course not. You did it your way.
Or did he do his own thing once again? I think I'm going to stick with the 3 spots.
I'm okay with that. And this goes to show that there is not something where it's like, this is the only way. This is the altar of logic games. You and I captured the same exact information in very slightly different ways.
Yeah.
So when I looked at this game and I saw 4 spaces above each person, I was like, there's 20 spaces in this game. Okay, maybe that's why it was so hard. But the first 5 rules then go through this, and they fill in half of those spaces on my diagram, and they fill in...
More than that on mine.
More than that on yours, although there's some uncertainty at times.
Sure.
That's okay. So as soon as that happened, I got a lot happier, because I don't want to deal with a game with 20 variables. It's too much. And the beauty of it is that you know right then that they're not going to leave you hanging. So as you go through the first 5 rules, they're telling you, all right, 2 of the 4 flowers being used are whatever they specify. And so I was able to just take the bottom 2 rows of my diagram and fill it all in. Mm-hmm. However, there were things that pop up that are both annoying and edifying as you kind of go through this. For example, the first rule talks about one of the people using two roses.
Mhm.
And so you have to kind of like track that as you go through it. And you and I both use blocks to kind of show that.
Yeah,
that,
I
you know,
actually, I blocked off the double rose spot because it's unique. No one else can do that. Anyone else with rose has only one, is what this rule means. Why not
Exactly.
3? Because the numbers don't allow it.
Yeah, if you add another rose, you've used 3 of the 4 flowers. You can only use one additional flower type, and then
Can't
you
get all
fall
3
short.
types, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, then you haven't used exactly 3 kinds of flowers.
Numbers,
The-
numbers, up and down.
Well, the appearance of the word exactly in this game is critical. You had to see it and recognize how important it was, because as it turned out, once they'd filled in 50% of the spaces, so 10 out of the 20, you were able to take a look at some of these other things and see like, all right, you know, this is what each person had. And then there's a couple mentions of this person and no one else.
Yeah. Glancing down, I've got 8 of my 15 filled in, but like static, permanent. There's
Which
some
is great.
variability in the other 7 of my 15 spaces, but 8 of the 15 fill in for sure. It's great.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important thing. It's this exactly or no one else keeps coming in. That's where you really get the ability to draw inferences out of this game. So, for example, they talk about Z, and no one else uses exactly 1 hyacinth and exactly 1 rose. So when you go down and you're taking a look at Z, you know that, at least for me, one of the spaces is H, one of the spaces is R. Same for you. And you're done. You now have 2 flowers left to fill in. But you can't be a rose or a hyacinth, so what's left? It's either G or L.
Yeah.
Can you use both G and L?
No,
No,
because
because
4
then,
types.
yeah, you'd have all 4 types, and you can't do that. So the remaining 2 spaces there are either 2 Gs or 2 Ls, which, you know, they do talk about one person using 2 lilies. And, well, guess what?
Yeah, exactly 1.
Yeah, Z is one of those people.
And that's the key, ultimately, to question 17.
Mm-hmm. So as you kind of get into this, you take a look then. So you can look at Z and you're like, oh, I've got that filled in. Yes, there's a rotating block there. It's either a block of 2 Gs or a block of 2 Ls, but you at least have reduced that. The uncertainty involving Z is now really, really low. And then let's say you take a look at W next to it. You know that W has got 2 gardenias.
Mhm.
All right, so they've used 1 flower. It's taken up 2 spaces. You need 2 more flower types.
Yep,
Well, what do
you've
you
got
have?
1 and a 1 left.
Mm-hmm.
Can they be R and H?
Well, you have H, L, and R
Right.
as your 3 options.
Right.
And I remember I kind of drew that in as a triple option. I was like, okay, you could have this. And I was like, wait, if you use just H and R, you're going to have 1 H and 1 R. Isn't that just what we were talking about with Zeppy?
Yeah, by far my favorite person in this game.
I was going to say, what kind of name is that?
Easily. I've never met a Zeppy.
You know all of his
dare
friends
to dream.
that
I
all
one
of his
day
friends
visit.
call him Lead. What's
Led
up, Led
Zeppy.
Zeppy?
Yeah, dare to dream. I mean, Zeppy. I feel he leaves his flowers at home.
You can show him raisin. Anyway.
That's right.
So all of a sudden, when you get over there to the to W and you're looking at it, you're like, well, I can't have just 1 H and 1 R. That would be a violation. So I know there has to be a lily here.
An L, yeah. Which fills, in your case, 3 of your 4 spots.
Yeah, and then now the remaining space is either H or R, and I've, again, reduced the uncertainty.
Yeah, this game was far more upfront limited than people recognized. And I don't want to speak too broadly, but I think that's probably a fair statement. The people who struggled on this game didn't realize just how accessible, just how many inferences existed.
This is my take on what happened, is that the appearance of an immense amount of variables to juggle was overwhelming.
Is that why
And
you likened it to the dinosaur game?
A little bit.
So you got the 5 out of 8 or 7 or whatever it was. You had the colors, the dinosaur names, Ultrasaur obviously being the best one.
I don't know that we can disagree on that.
rankings today.
I believe the Ultrasaur is the best of them.
Clearly.
But it is that. It's you're juggling so much information that you might miss these backdoor inferences that limit what can actually happen. That's what happens in that game. That's certainly what happens here. Once you start to narrow down 1 or 2 of them, it begins to kind of like get easier to see that this game isn't so much. The focus here has to be on 2 things. Where you were. in terms of like you've just filled in 10 of my 20 spaces.
11 actually, if you're 20, if you count them again.
I was just talking about initially. I'm not adding in more and more, but yes, you've added in L for W.
W's L would be your 11th, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you have to look back at what you have and then start comparing it to what they've already told you, because they keep giving you these subtle hints. This person and no one else does this. When you have that, that's going to be a trigger to you that says, maybe I should watch out for violations. Who is in danger of violating that? And then take a look. When you have Zeppy over there with that one hyacinth and one rose, it turns out that W, who's got to use a hyacinth or a rose, is in danger of violating it, and that limits what can actually happen. Mm-hmm. You have to follow the signposts as you go through Logic Games. And they're not doing it accidentally. It's obviously they've studied it. They're giving you clues. The overlap here is really in saying, all right, this exactitude is going to have a limiting effect on everybody else. For some people, it won't matter. You can't worry about them. You have to say who's most likely to be affected by this and then narrow it in. And when you do that, the numerical limitations come in, and all of a sudden, inferences start dropping out. Oh, this person would have to be this. That person would have to be this. And there's more to it, obviously, but that's the way to attack this game and start to feel like, okay, I'm getting a grip on it. And once you have a setup that starts to fill itself in, and if it doesn't fill itself in perfectly, usually you still have a reduced number of options.
Yeah.
It becomes a lot easier. So.
Yeah, the thing that flashed to the forefront of my brain over and over as I went through this section, and I've said it a bunch of times, is just numbers. This is a numbers. This game in particular is a numbers test. Who's the double in each group? Find that.
Is it a hard game, John?
Yeah, how do you not duplicate double roses or single H and R? Like, these were all numbers questions. Question 14, who could be the same? Strict test of counting, ultimately.
That's exactly right. But is it a hard game overall? Yes. The answer is yes.
Well, no, it's not yes. So otherwise, I would have said yes.
It's yes. Another mistake
I hesitated because I don't want to give this game the same credibility that people initially imbued it with. I think this game is oversold. I think this game is exaggerated in people's minds. I think the infamy this game failed to earn, frankly, in my mind, is worth calling out. I don't think this is a hard game.
I think in Logic Games
and we said this on Twitter and admitted the fact that we were going to be unpopular.
I posted something that said unpopular opinion or unpopular take. It's not that hard.
And I doubled right down on it.
Here's the way I look at it. In the pantheon of all games, it's definitely among harder games.
All right.
Okay. Come on, there's so many basic linear games
no,
that
of course,
just aren't tough.
Of course.
In the pantheon of really hard games, this is not anywhere near the top.
Would this make your top 10, for instance? No, not even.
Not even close.
Scratch the surface.
I don't want to see like the stained glass windows game on any exam.
Yeah, use jazz CDs or whatever. I don't know.
Jazz CDs didn't even bother me. I hated that stained glass window game. It's, if I recall, that's the December 2012 LSAT.
I think that's right. Yeah,
that is on there. I know a little bit, and so. That's the type of game where I look at it and I'm like, well, this is just utterly brutal and it's going to be time consuming. There's a ton of questions on that game too. I felt pretty good about this because I was able to fill stuff in. I was like, let's look at it. You have to look at each individual person. And that is a point of analysis that you have to include. You can't just say, well, there's the rules. And now I filled in half of it. Okay, I'm on my way. You have to stop and be like, well, what does it mean? Because there are really very few rules aside from compositional aspects. So you have to just go look at the composition of the arrangement for each person. It's easy to overlook. It's easy to go headlong into the questions. If you do that without properly analyzing each person, the game gets way harder.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's easy to fall into disaster. This was a game that had a lot of
opportunities to be difficult.
That's a good point, though. It's a game that has many chances to step off the path and fall into the oblivion.
I can see the train wreck from a distance here. I think it was very avoidable.
Now, the good news on this game, only 5 questions.
True that.
However, John, question 17.
Don't phrase it like that. Like I had some immediate objection to whatever you were about to say. That's how you just framed that. This is preemptively, you're like, I know you're going to disagree.
No, I know you. The way I look at this question is it's a Rick and Morty reference. In bird culture, this is what they call a dick move. Let's just go ahead and have to redo the game. In general, most people are going to get to question 17 and think, I have to reset it up. So it feels like a whole new diagram there. I'm not a fan of them doing this. I think it's a cheap shot. I think it's a way to make a game that has only 5 questions really act like a game that has 7 questions.
Yeah,
this section didn't need it. Not a fan of this test-making move by them where they simply say, hey, remember that rule that you spent all this time working with? Yeah, we're just going to drop it and change it. You got to start all over again, at least to a certain extent. You still have the 2-1-1 relationship that you're dealing with, but...
Yeah, I also don't like, and this is going to be a real deep dive, but I don't like where they put the right answer choice. That to me was also, in bird culture, a dick move.
Tammy.
Anyway.
Season 4 is coming.
Next month, man. Very excited.
Soon. I don't love it either. I didn't like that as an ending. I thought this game was challenging enough. They should have just had another regular question here. I suppose, it's nice you didn't get a rule substitution or something like that, but
yeah, what would you call this? Rule replacement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you literally change one of the conditions and you're not asking for a particular result. You're just saying that rule no longer is active. You suspend that rule and then you replace it with a new one.
What would be the result is what they're actually asking here.
Yeah, so, what happens?
I do like at least they left it as must be true because there's a single answer then that has to occur. And again, if you're just paying attention to the count, the numbers, it's not that tough.
It's tough.
What? Maybe
it's not so much high difficulty as high time consumption.
When we're done with this, I'll explain it to you.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. You're going to get a lot out of it.
Anyway, John's going to go into much greater detail on this game.
I'll explain it to other people who need it.
And diagram it out. And I think when you see the setup that he's used, or the one that I use, they're both good.
I'll reference yours, by the way, as an option, because I don't think you blew it.
No, I think you can show it either way. I clearly didn't blow it because I was able to do this game and feel good about it.
Yeah.
And it's
question 17. It'll make more sense when I'm done with you.
You probably stayed up all night coming up with that setup.
I did. You got me.
So we'll leave that at that. Tough game, I think. Not the hardest game of all time, which is what I was told by multiple people after this test. However, every single time in my LSAC career that someone has said, this is the hardest reading comp, LR game, it's never really turned out to be that way.
Well, it's a little prejudicial, too, because we go into it with these built-up expectations, and we look at it and we're like, that? Really?
And let's be honest, there's zero pressure on us.
Well, that's a big part of it, too. There was a comment that a guy made on Twitter yesterday where he's like, do you guys take into effect the fact that you're really good at this? I'm like, of course we do. Yeah. When we say that something's not that hard, it's not that it's not that hard for us. It's in the grand scheme, the pantheon of competition for people.
It didn't have to be as hard as people thought it was.
Right. There was no brute force required here that a lot of people felt they needed to employ.
Yeah, and as I've said already, we've seen people coming back after having done this and been like, it wasn't quite what I thought. I might have misread something.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people recalibrate in the last 24 hours.
Well, let's go on to game number 4.
Okay.
This game is the Accountant-Client Meetings, which is another advanced linear game. And it starts off looking like you may have a problem because you have 3 days and there's 6 spaces. There's a morning space for each day and an afternoon space each day. So you have 6 spaces, but there's only 5 different clients that are being met with. So that's what I mean when I say it looks like we might have a problem. Some people never got to this game because they just got bogged down in the flowers. And then they ended up telling people, I'm never buying flowers again, or I'll look them the same.
Yeah, I heard that comment from a lot of people. They got home after the LSAT and their boyfriend had bought them flowers, and it triggered them.
Not something to worry about. So the thing, though, is the 5 meetings, that 6th meeting, fortunately, there's not 2 meetings. There's no duplication. So instead of this being like a 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, etc., this game just has an empty space.
Right. Which is ultimately the necessity to figure out right away. Again, God, I feel like a broken record, but numbers. If you've got 5 into 6, what are you going to do? You're either going to duplicate someone or you're going to have an empty spot. but you want to try to balance this if you can, make the numbers match. What did you do?
I just put E for empty.
I put X for empty.
Same difference.
Yeah.
There is no benefit to either. Maybe X is faster to write.
Yeah, there's one more stroke, I suppose, to an X. 1, 2. I guess it depends on how you compose your E.
You can also do as one, but whatever. From an efficiency standpoint, we're talking extremely minor. But you need to have a placeholder to represent an empty space like that. So to me, this game isn't 5 into 6. When you add the empty space to your list, it becomes 6 into 6.
Yeah.
So that makes the game, I think, a little bit easier. But as we know, we've been talking about numbers. This game certainly features numbers, I think, in a very big way. I see why this game, when people got to it, they're like, this is harder than I expect. Like 6 into 6 doesn't seem like it's going to be that bad. But then you've got these 2 rows, one for morning and one for afternoon. And it starts to get like, well, there's a lot happening. Some of the rules are a little bit interesting. Focus on what's happening with the numbers. And we'll talk a little bit about that here.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first rule gives you 2 variables, and they are not afternoon people. They are morning people. And I think for a lot of people, they were like, okay, they don't go in the afternoon, they're in the morning pool, and they moved on. That was a mistake. It's really critical that when you see this rule, you capitalize on what it is telling you, because it is saying that of all these variables, in the morning row, 2 of the 3 are taken up. So H and L, which are those variables, they have to be in that morning group. That means that there's only one remaining variable that is going to go into the morning group. And if you put anything else on a morning position, let's say you decided to put G on Thursday morning, that is automatically going to mean that H and L are occupying the Wednesday and Friday days. So it would push it in, and that would also completely fill in
a ton of stuff. Yeah,
it fills in your entire afternoon group. And we haven't even begun talking about any specific rules controlling variable placement. We're just talking about the grouping aspect. So when Jon talks about numbers and he's like, oh, I'm not trying to beat this to death. No, it needs to be. This is the critical thing right here. That first rule to me, I was like, oh, this just made it a lot easier because now I only have one open morning space. So anytime they fill a morning guy in that's not H or L, bang, I've got the whole composition of the morning and the afternoon. That's going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah, I mentioned this on the first game, talking about like the limited selection set. You saw it on the Flowers game, picking 3 out of 4 every time. That's a really small collection of things as a selection set. Here you get it again, picking 3 of your 5 to fill those morning spots, 3 of your 6 if you have the empty, to fill those morning spots, and you know what 2 of them have to be? Extremely powerful, extremely limiting. So these like constriction points, these choke points in a game, that's where my attention tends to linger.
As it should. And it pays off.
Yeah.
So the next 2 rules they have a slight variation to them in terms of like how they connect the variables. The second one is that you basically have a broad scale block in terms of the days. That J is going to be scheduled for the day before G, meaning it's either Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday. But what it doesn't do is control whether they're morning or afternoon.
Right.
At least not initially. We do know some things, like you can't have both J and G be in the morning, because then there wouldn't be room for H and L.
Right.
So I can start to make some inferences like, all right, at least one of them looks to be in the afternoon, these kinds of things. But it's interesting to note how they do it the day before. So part of what I was thinking was like, boy, I wonder if I could template this given the limitation that we have.
It crossed my mind too.
Yeah. And so if somebody said, well, I did template it, my response would be like, understand, makes total sense to me. I hesitated, and then I went to the last rule, and I was like, and I actually charted out 2 of the possibilities. But the last rule talks about connecting G and K, but not by days, but by their meetings.
Separation, yeah.
Yeah, G and K are either consecutive meetings. Doesn't have to be the same day. For example, Thursday afternoon and Friday morning are consecutive meetings. So that would be okay. You either have G and K consecutive in some order, or they're separated by at most 1 meeting. So if one of them was Thursday afternoon, then conceivably the other could be Friday afternoon in terms of how the separation actually works. So that's a little bit loose. That's kind of like an accordion effect, where it's either a block or a block that is split by one space, but it's also flowing almost serpent-like over the mornings and afternoons of each day. John, you good with that?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
To me, this was the toughest rule, like as a standalone thing to diagram, and I think that probably threw a lot of people. Like, how do I even represent this off to the side of my setup?
I just did it as straight a block and then a split block with a space, and then I just said, look, I'm going to have to realize that
one or the other.
Yeah, it's a linear game inside these 3 days, and so I'll just have to see it.
I suppose maybe the thing that occurred to me that some people might have missed, not to presume too much, would have been the fact that there actually can be a 2 separation. The G and K can be separated by 2 positions if one of them's empty.
Right.
And
that's the split block aspects.
Right. That's a little bit trickier to represent because there could be 2 positions between G and K. Like G could be Thursday morning, K could theoretically be Friday afternoon.
Yeah, with the empty.
If there's an empty space in between the 2.
Which is a pain.
Yeah. H or L would be one of the spots, and then Thursday afternoon would be empty, if I'm really going to stretch this. But yeah.
But notice how the last 2 rules, who's the star here? G.
Mm-hmm.
G is really powerful, and since I already knew that H and L were in the morning, one of the things I did was I just looked at G on its 2 possible morning spots, one on Thursday morning, one on Friday. It can't go on Wednesday
morning because then, J can't be the day before.
Yeah, then there'd be no room for J. And I just looked at those 2, and I was like, those actually fill in really well. So they gave me 2 quick hypotheticals, and then I looked at the afternoon, and I was like, I'm not going to draw out the afternoons because I don't have as much information. Maybe I'll get forced to do that at some point. And then it was off to the questions.
Yeah.
But again, look at the numerical power. That H and L as being 2 of them, whoever else you throw in there is going to have a really big effect. And from that point on, it's another 6-question game here. First one's a list question. You should go and knock that out. It's just a rule application. If you're not comfortable with those, you need to get comfortable right away. And then you start getting some of these questions like 19, which I think was meant to be their devastator question. Like, where can K not go?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you know that K and G are linked up in some respect. So you've got to figure that's going to relate to what's happening with G and then G and J. Even though they've asked you about K, go back to what K is connected to.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you put K on the morning, you're going to end up pushing G on Wednesday morning, that is. You're going to end up pushing G too far away.
Yeah. G gets pushed to Thursday afternoon. There's a J in between, obviously. And there's an H or L in between. That's too much.
It's too much space.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So that to me, it's funny. I don't know if you caught that inference in your setup. I was lucky enough to. So I realized the not law for K and Wednesday morning as part of my setup. So as soon as I saw 19, I was like, oh, I already did this.
That's impressive. Well done. I didn't take it that far.
Yeah.
It
was just one of those things I happened to catch. As soon as I saw how powerful G was going to be and how it was going to get pushed down and that it was connected to K, I was like, what would cause a problem here?
This is an interesting point because I feel like in the setup that I did was I didn't give it this deep dive analysis. I got to a point where I was like, I'm really comfortable with what I know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to now start working out all these different configurations. And it didn't just immediately jump to me.
Which is a really fair point. I'm sure at 19 when you ultimately got it right, you added to your setup.
Yeah.
I love that moment in games. I'm like, oh, how about that? Here's a bonus.
Well, I got to 19 and I was like, no big deal. You can't go somewhere. I already felt like I had a lot of control over the game.
Yeah.
And so when you have that degree of control, you can sometimes forego like further analysis or further details.
Yeah, I'll make a further point that tends to occur to me as I do sequencing, which is the extremities tend to be the point with the most restriction. So 1 through 7, 1 and 7 tend to be the most limiting spots. In this case, really it's 1 through 6. 3 days, but morning, afternoon. So the earliest morning and the latest afternoon, those tend to be the positions that are going to have the most limitations, which is what caused me to look at Wednesday morning in the first place.
Which makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Because you're also dealing with H and L in that, that area and so forth. So you've got a lot of heavy traffic around that particular spot, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and the rest of the questions, like question 22, make a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about it. Same thing with something like 20. If you don't see it, and the way the groups work, because question 20 is really about the groups, try some options and see what happens. Do not sit there and think, I missed something. What am I going to do? Work. Try a solution. It will show you something. I can't tell you the number of times people have come back to me and been like, I was looking at a game, not necessarily one of these, and I just got stopped. And I remembered the advice, don't stop, keep working. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me after making like one or two quick hypotheticals that, oh, these variables can't work like that. And then the game just unlocked quickly for me.
Yeah, it's really, I think, a hugely salient point. It's impossible to overemphasize momentum. You have to keep forward progress. So if I look at a game like this and I'm like, oh boy, I really don't know what's going on, or I'm not seeing much, or I'm not feeling like I'm really dialed into the mechanics of it, I would look at a question like 22 or 23 as a really good jumping off point. I would see 22 and be like, I'm going to sketch that. This will show me two things. The answer to the question, one hopes, but also the inner workings of the game itself. How are these wheels actually turning?
If you are stuck in terms of a setup, go to local questions. They force you to work with the variables. You can just quickly, go through them in the digital platform, arrive at that, and then start doing some work and making those hypotheticals, which oftentimes will give you new insights into the game.
It's incredible how much they can unlock. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love hypotheticals. Fantastic tool to have. You should never hesitate to be like, well, let me just try it. The thing I will say is I believe a lot of people look at logic games and what they're really hoping for is this smooth pathway. It's not how it works. And the sooner that most people face that truth, not you, John, but the sooner that most people face that, the better off that they'll be. There are going to be times for almost everyone that you run into something where it's not clear. Yeah. It's okay to reread it. If you miss a rule, you're dead. So you cannot afford to have that happen.
I think it's adorable that you thought I was most people.
Or you run into something like, maybe a question and you're stopped by it. Don't stop. Yeah. Go and work. And realize that those setbacks, that hardship, that just makes you more knowledgeable as you move forward. Take it as a positive. Try to encompass it and master it and move on. And that's during the time that you actually have. So it's not just going to be easy skating. That's just not the way that games work. It's not really the way this test works. It's how you respond to that adversity and what you do in that moment that really makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, that's really well said. I cherish this game section for a lot of reasons, but primarily at this point because of what a valuable teaching tool it is. People are going to do this game section in preparation for their future LSAT, and they're going to learn so much about how this test operates and how they're meant to respond to it in the appropriate way. They may not behave that way initially, but they can learn how to behave that way through this game section. So to me, I'm actually really glad that this exists.
Me too. I think it's really useful. It's the subtle use of the numbers here and the way we're able to come back to it over and over again may sound repetitive, but boy, I know a lot of people are thinking, I wish I'd looked at it from that angle. I mean, this is what we do in our books, in our courses, is we try to focus on the elements where they can really get you in trouble. And so that the next time when you face something like this, you're not in trouble.
Exactly.
So, but if you do, work your way through it. Try hypotheticals, go back, make sure that you read everything, make sure you didn't miss a rule or misinterpret it. It happens to everybody that they miss a word, except John, of course. Yeah, well, once in a while, or
doesn't
they
that go
misread
without
something.
saying by now?
Of course. No mistakes there.
Never.
Not you and Raisin.
No, me and Raisin are blazing our own trails. But this is this is such a good game section. I'm really excited. And for anyone listening to this who's like, maybe now a little bit juiced to go see it, again, we'll put a link to where you can go buy this thing because you need to do this probably several times before you take your actual test. And
you want to do it in a digital environment too.
Yeah.
I think, it's one thing to do it on paper, but it's helpful to be like, okay, I got stopped by that question. Let me, fast forward to the next question. Oh, it's local. Maybe I'll work on that instead. You want to have that kind of opportunity, and you want every practice option that you can for the next digital test to be ready for those. You want to practice in the environment.
Exactly. All right. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's all I got.
I know you have a lot more because you're actually going to do the video on it where you'll go through this stuff step by step. And
I'm cutting myself off a little bit because there are more things I want to say, and I realize I shouldn't. So I'm going to save them for the video.
Yeah, I don't think this was meant to be like, oh, we're explaining everything. It's more like, let's talk about this and use it for what it is, a great learning tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel comfortable that we were able to do that.
I hope so. I think so.
And we got to make fun of Raisin. So
lay off Raisin.
You can name your next dog Wags.
Wags. All
right. That is it for us. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you now have a little bit less fear of that September 2019 LSAT Logic Games section. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or any other service where you find it. Give us a rating. And if you have questions, please send a message to us at lsatpodcast@powerscore.com or lsat@powerscore.com. On behalf of John, Raisin, and myself, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.